and then college basketball game by game. Now, it's a little easier for me to continue to do the game by game thing with college basketball, just because I'm so used to doing it over the years as opposed to football. So we're going to continue that. So I'm going to talk about all 12 games tonight. I'm going to try not to harp too long on each one because I want to keep the show under 2 hours as much as possible. You longtime viewers and listeners and all that stuff, don't mind the long shows. You guys have been used to it over the years, but some of the new folks, they're used to the hour-long, 90-minute stuff from people, and I don't want to lose them midway through. So I'm going to try my best to get through this in a timely fashion. But with as long-winded as I am and how much I sidebar, I don't know if that's going to be possible. It is a 2K to first jam, so I was kind of hoping that would have been a lot bigger for a 12-gamer. Still, as I mentioned, a pretty important set of bowl games tomorrow for college football with Ohio State, Georgia, TCU, Michigan with the the playoffs, and then Alabama playing Kansas State, which is a pretty fun game. So there's still a lot riding there on that slate, and there's a lot of heavy contests for that. So still taking away from college basketball just a little bit longer. But contest-wise, 2K to first, we'll take that. We'll run with it. There is the normal set of game, contest with the 33, the single entry 50, all that stuff. Cash games galore, head-to-heads. Just play what we got and just keep grinding through it. It sounds like we have a pretty good chance of having a mini max relatively soon, which is the $1 150 max. I've been angling for that for a month now, and I think hopefully my persistence and my consistent bothering of the DK assist account and DMs will finally break them down, and they'll get that, because that is really, this time of year as we get into conference play, MME becomes a pretty profitable move for college basketball. And you'll see with some of the variants, fouls, random terrible games, random explosions from guys who rarely ever do anything. We're dealing with college kids at the end of the day, and they could very easily be upset about a breakup or a test or anything like that. And I think we sometimes forget that these aren't necessarily grown men. They're still growing mentally, and sometimes we're going to be dealing with some big-time variance in college sports. We just have to remember that sometimes. All right. I do have a potential interruption in the middle of the show. If it happens, it'll be very brief. I have my older son spending the weekend with me, but he is with some family friends at a hockey game, and it's just wrapping up. So he will be texting me when he arrives at some point. I will have to let him in. That'll take all of 30 seconds. So just a brief interruption. Just want to prepare you guys for that. All right. So I'm going to talk DFS, going to talk PrizePicks, which it doesn't look like there's a PrizePicks board up yet. I don't know if that will go up by the time I'm done talking about the DFS slate. We'll see. And then any props that may be popping up. But otherwise, I think it's probably going to be tomorrow morning when you guys need to check back in on the tracker and the CBB Discord for any prop stuff and PrizePicks. Make sure you guys are a part of that Discord, ftndaily.com. If you're not already, you can use that code DUB, get yourself a fat discount. Not only do you get access to our articles, we do all the time in the different sports, private shows for the subs only, our tracker information. Discord is probably the most valuable piece of content that we have, or information that we have. Gives you guys starter information, injury news. Frequently we're posting stuff right up to the last minute about potential swaps, guys who are out, late scratches, stuff like that. Checking message boards, whatever it is, social media. Very important aspect of what we do is the Discord. So if you're not a member of FTN yet and you're not in the Discord, you really are missing out. But I still appreciate checking in and watching the YouTube show here. Any support you give me at all is very, very appreciated. All right, so starting out here, first game, there are, 6 bright and early. First thing when the slate locks, so half the slate locking right at the beginning of the day, right in the morning. That can sometimes be tricky, frustrating, or sometimes it can be fun. The first game we're going to talk about is Kentucky versus Louisville, a Louisville team that I have, coming into the season, harped on, saying, knew they were going to be pretty porous. no point guard, aside from just one with LLS. That's really tough to go into the season and do. They came into it with some real bad losses, did rattle off a couple of wins against Western Kentucky and Florida A&M, but then proceeded to drop a home game to Lipscomb and a game against NC State that they were kind of, hanging around for a while before bowing out. But 2-11 in Kenny Payne's first season. I hope he survives this first season. They need to have some pretty tempered expectations. There was a lot of excitement for Payne when he came to Louisville, but lost a lot of recruits right away and whiffed on some important transfers. And I think he overvalued the guys he had on this team, and he was expecting Jalen Withers to make the next step. Hasn't happened. I think he was expecting Brandon Huntley Hatfield to be as good as advertised with his pedigree coming from the Vols and a highly rated recruit. And he's played well lately, but still, these are bigs. These are guys that are okay, but we know in college basketball, especially when the game matters, you need guards, and they just don't have them. So playing up against Kentucky, they do have guards, whether, Severe Wheeler, some of the youngsters. They, of course, have Oscar Tshiebwe, who is probably going to get this front court of Louisville in some serious trouble with fouls. This game has a look of some popularity on the Kentucky side, especially with Oscar Tshiebwe. He typically is pretty popular. I'm always looking for a reason to fade him. I did it a lot last year, and I got away with it quite a bit. It's a tough proposition to do, and it can be definitely scary. But he's over 10K. We definitely have value on this slate. The slates, we went through like a 2-week period right before Christmas where the slates were priced pretty damn well. The best they had been priced in probably 3 years, honestly. And now we've, after Christmas, regressed back to pretty trashy pricing. We had too much value the other night. We didn't have enough value today, which was nice, but still the only available value there was super high owned, except Minifield wasn't. That was nice to see. But today on this particular slate, this 12 gamer, there are a lot of missed prices. The Oklahoma kid Milos is still under 5K. So expect him to be 60% owned in single entry, even on a 12 gamer, which makes me absolutely sick to my stomach, but we're going to be using him. There's other cheap guys that we're going to talk about. So you can easily fit Oscar if you want. And that tends to make him higher owned on these typical slates when there's a lot of cheap players, because you have this salary available to you. Where are you going to use it? Oscar, he's pretty much a threat to score 50 plus fantasy points at any time. Played 40 minutes against Missouri. A really nice win for Missouri. I got to say, this Missouri team has been very good. Their non-con schedule pretty bad. They did play Kansas, which was a big loss for them. They did play UCF and Illinois at the end of it, which were good wins for them. But coming in and winning 89-75 against Kentucky, that was pretty huge. Dennis Gates is a really nice coach, and he's doing a damn good job out there. But Oscar, 40 minutes, that's pretty impressive for him. Only 3 fouls. To see Oscar play 40 minutes, that's pretty scary for me. If he can, show that kind of conditioning where he's going to be on the floor for 40 minutes, then yeah, fading him is damn scary, because at 32 minutes, I can get away with fading him. At 40, I probably can't. And you see he had 23 points, 19 rebounds, a couple of steals, got to the foul line 17 times, just drawing fouls at an incredibly high rate. And still Missouri pulls out the win, even though he's getting Ronnie DeGray and Kobe Brown and a couple of other guys into foul trouble at early on. Although Kobe Brown was MJ in that game, scoring 30 real points. Looks like last year's Kobe Brown is finally here to play. But yeah, if Oscar's getting those kind of minutes, then geez, I don't know. Can we really get away from him? Because looking at the rest, 27, 39, 38, 31, 32, 22, 28, 14, and 34. So in games that have been relatively close, the Yale game, they only won by 10. He played 38. UCLA, which neutral court loss, played 39. He's really got quite good conditioning this season. So looking at it, the deal with him, 24.5% usage rate, offensive rebounding rate of 20%, top 5 in the country there, 30% defensive rebounding rate, that's top 10, drawing 4.5 fouls per 40, has a very high free throw rate this season, 3.5% steal rate, 4.5% block rate, just 270 pounds of all all man when it comes with Oscar Tshiebwe. Just, an amazing player. So obviously a guy to look at here for Kentucky. Louisville has nobody that's going to be able to stop him. Withers is just unfortunately soft. I hate talking shit about a kid, but he's just soft. And I don't know that Huntley Hatfield has the chops yet. He's still fairly raw on the defensive side of things. We're probably going to see Sidney Curry foul out extremely fast. I would imagine Sidney Curry picks up 2 fouls in this game within 30 seconds. I'll be shocked. I'll set the over-under at 31.5 seconds, especially if he has to guard Oscar, which I think he will have some shifts on him. Other guys to look at here on the Kentucky side, it's, Severe Wheeler at 6'5". That's a good price. Wheeler is somebody who I think we look at when he's priced in this like 6K range, which has been a lot this season, and kind of talk ourselves into it because we know he's capable of putting up a big score. He's shown it in the past. He was a real solid option at Georgia. He's been a good option at Kentucky. He's, a real good Robin to Oscar's Batman, capable mid-20s fantasy point scorer. It's just not that exciting to me. The assist rate is high. He's going to be there. Scoring is going to be hit or miss, but there's just not a lot of excitement, not a lot of upside for Wheeler. And I think that this slate's too big for me to really waste a spot on Wheeler because I think more often than not, he's going to put up a 20 to 22. And at 6'5", that's just not going to be enough for a slate this large. Other options, Cason Wallace for large field GPP. I do like him quite a bit. 7.6 is a tough price. I'm not going to use him in my main or anything, but I definitely think that he could eat in this particular matchup. There's nobody on the Louisville side capable of guarding him. You saw against FAMU, 27 real points, put up 52.5. He's had solid performances in 3 of his last 5, 28 plus fantasy points, which included almost 40 against Michigan and almost 30 against Missouri last time out. Taking double-digit shots 3 games in a row, 13-plus field goal attempts, 13 threes in his last game attempted, hit 5 of them. The game before that, 5 of 6. So he's starting to come into his own. You know the deal with these Calipari freshmen. They kind of start off slow, right? Kind of find their way. There's too much talent on the team. They've got to get cohesiveness. They've got to gel. Minutes are being divvied up, and then all of a sudden we start seeing the development and 1 or 2 of the freshmen start kind of asserting themselves, and Wallace is definitely starting to do that. He's just priced way too high for me to really seriously consider him. I would not be shocked to see him put up 40 though at probably 5% ownership here. With the slate this large, nobody's going to be rostering him. Definitely has Posh Play of the Day vibes. Not going to name him Posh Play of the Day, which we're going to have our 4th Posh of the season, by the way. But he's definitely a guy that I like. We are looking at, let's see, with Kentucky's starting lineup, we do have a possible value option. Lance Ware did play 30 minutes last game. He is pretty raw. He does get into foul trouble at times. But I mean, geez, if he's going to start and play 20 minutes at near min price at 3.3, I'm certainly in on him. 17 fantasy points against Missouri. He had 14 a couple of games ago against UCLA in just 14 minutes. So playing a lot more. We're seeing some, maturation with him. But again, just kind of really on the raw side. CJ Frederick left the game against Missouri with an injury. I think it was a hand injury. So there are minutes to go around if they want to run a larger lineup or if they want to, run more Reeves. But definitely if Ware gets to start at 3.3, and we'll know right away because it's one of the first games on the slate, he's a viable option. I don't necessarily want to be stacking Kentucky big. So if you're going to go the Oscar route, I think you probably want to look for value elsewhere. If you're going with the Oscar fade, then I think it makes a lot of sense to play Lance Ware and hope that, he has a game where he's able to get a bunch of rebounds. Maybe, he can put in some putbacks, get to like 8 real and put up an 18 to 20 fantasy point score at 3.3, and then you're feeling really good about yourself. Even if Oscar on the fade puts up like 45, I think if you get a 20 out of Ware, you're really in the driver's seat because you have plenty of upper tier options left the rest of the way to catch up with the Oscar score. Louisville side, it's rough. It is extremely rough. LLS being the only guard, he's typically fairly viable of an option. He is 7'3", not feeling him on this slate. I think defensively, the perimeter and the length of Kentucky will really bother him. I don't see him getting to the lane as much as he would probably like. And when he does, he's going to be met with long, athletic shot blockers in the paint. Sidney Curry at 5'5", I'm glad his price has come up. He was pretty popular just recently when his price was, 4.9 after he put up a 40 against FAMU. Had a pretty decent game against NC State, priced appropriately at 5.5. If people want to continue to try to roll him out there, I'm fine with it. Like I said, he's certainly going to be in foul trouble early on in this game. There's no doubt in my mind. Jalen Withers, who is a good offensive player at times, he just fades into the background too much, capable of throwing up a literal 5 fantasy point game. 5.8 is a okay price for him in maybe a different matchup, but just far too soft for my liking. And then Huntley Hatfield at 6'1". Big game last time against NC State, 12 points, 12 rebounds. He's just not going to do that consistently. He's still raw. He has the upside. He's going to continue to develop, and if he sticks with it here with Payne in this program, especially next year coming into the season, he's going to be a really strong top player for them and do some things. But again, going up against that Kentucky front court, I just don't think he has it in him to put up a 30 or pay off the 6'1", which is a decent price. And then, I mean, you got Kamari Lands, Mike James, JJ Traynor, like just a bunch of darts that you're looking at on the value side. Not really anything that we want to be messing with in our main lineup. Kamari Lands is somebody who I've been saying should play more minutes. He did play 20 in that game against NC State, but I just don't think we can use him here. Moving on, we're going to talk about UConn and Xavier. Let me say regarding the Huskies, they are a very scary team. They have some really nice wins in the non-con: Alabama, Iowa State, Florida, Oklahoma State. Just saw a pretty solid Buffalo team. And then, coming into conference play, they just rattle out a big win over Butler without even having to break a sweat. Closer than expected game against the Hoyas, and then they handled Nova. The game ended up being pretty close, but they really did handle them. And heading into this game against Xavier, should be another close game, but I think they'll have Xavier's number. Dan Hurley has built a really, really good program, has picked up the pieces from, a really weird Kevin Ollie era, and he is way better than Bobby and Hurley, as John Rothstein would say. Total opposite with the brothers. Dan Hurley is that guy. Has the Huskies 4th in defensive efficiency, 7th in offensive efficiency. You don't typically see a team excel in both like that very often. Very, very good. I will say with Sanogo going forward, I'm cutting myself off from his rebounding props. He has been killing me. To start the season, he was money on his props. The last 2 or 3 games with his rebounding stuff, they've made it like 6.5 and 7.5. Really achievable numbers for him, and he just hasn't been getting it done. The game against Nova, he was terrible, foul trouble galore. The game against Georgetown, he was just kind of mediocre. 27 fantasy points is good, don't get me wrong, but we're at a point with Sanogo where 30 plus or I want my money back. And rebounds, they're just too sporadic for him lately. I don't know what the deal is. I mean, there's other guys capable of working the glass. Donovan Clingan, who's just a monster. We're seeing Andre Jackson hit the glass a lot more. He's been rebounding at a pretty high rate. 4 of his last 5, 6+ rebounds. So there's just guys taking it away from Sanogo. We're also seeing his offense suffer a little bit because Jordan Hawkins has emerged as such a lethal scorer. He took 11 threes in that game against Nova, 14 shots, made 43% of those, on his way to another 37-point performance. I love Jordan Hawkins. He was really cheap throughout the season. Probably my favorite Husky player from a DFS and fantasy standpoint. Another guy priced in the mid 7K range where I think people will probably hesitate to use him and not really look in his direction. But again, Xavier, I expect the game to be a little bit more higher scoring than maybe the Huskies are accustomed to. Xavier tends to make games play out that way, and that's just going to benefit Hawkins a lot. the Sonogo matchup down low with Fremantle and maybe a little bit of Nunch. I could see those guys neutralizing each other a little bit, getting into some foul trouble. And I just worry about Sonogo right now and paying that top price or one of those premium prices of 8.6 for him just isn't in the cards for me right now. And I'm going to leave his props alone, whatever they end up being. Jordan Hawkins at 7.5, 1,100 cheaper. We know he's going to jack up a ton of shots. I could very easily see Hawkins and on the other side for Xavier, Soli Boom, just go back and forth, taking, jumper after jumper, attacking each other and trying to one-up each other. And if that's the case, I want exposure to each of them, but Jordan Hawkins would be my lean for a main lineup type of play. Tristan Newton has been a solid GPP play at times. He is a guy at 6'8" that will be forgotten about. His minutes have taken a tumble a little bit, but just 2 games ago against Georgetown, 17.7 assists on his way to 32 fantasy points. Early on in the season, he had a couple of 36, 43, 64. Like, he is a big-time talent from ECU. There's just so many shot takers on this team, and they've been able to kind of quell each other and gel together and just kind of put each other's ego aside for the betterment of the team, which is great. But it's hurt Newton a little bit because he just has other guys in front of him that are taking shots. But if Hawkins were to have a bad day or defensively, he was handcuffed. Jackson's, banged up like usual. Calcaterra just can't hit the broadside of a barn, something like that, and they need a bucket. They can absolutely go to Newton and look to him. I like him for the large field GPPs at 6'8". Like I said, nobody's going to be looking at his direction. I think most people would rather go to Andre Jackson. He is more of a industry favorite for the past couple of seasons. He's just been really a consistent option, contributes in multiple categories, and has a really high floor because of it. And like I said, people just tend to gravitate towards him more. So we'll see Jackson rostership probably on the higher side for Huskies. I don't necessarily think he'll be super high owned, but for Huskies players, he'll probably be one of the higher owned. Give me Jordan Hawkins. Give me a little bit of Tristan Newton. I'm looking at those guys there, leaving the Sonogo, Klingon, Caravan type players on the sidelines. For Xavier, we have some really high prices and with good reason. Soli Boom, he had that 60 against Georgetown. Paying 8.8 for him is it's too high. He needs to come back down into the low 8K range before we can really consider him. And even at that price, I'm probably not pulling the trigger. I think we're looking at a guy that is running the offense really well. He has a pretty efficient game. He has a really high assist rate, and he's just really gelled into this offense quite well after playing, for a lower tier program for so many years. It's good to see, but I'm just not seeing myself paying 8.8, especially against the UConn defense. Colby Jones, same thing at 8.7. That's just going to be too high. Capable of putting 40 to 50 on the board, mainly going to hit 25 to 30 a lot. We can do a little bit better. My man on this team is usually Jack Nungy. He has done me extremely well. The game against Georgetown, he was really high-priced, really low-owned, absolutely just detonated. And he followed that up with a really strong game against St. John's. All right, this is the break in the action that I had warned you guys about. I apologize. Give me 1 second here as I step away, let my son in, and then I'll be. All right. A little over 30 seconds. I was a little off with my prediction. All righty. Other options on the team, Zach Fremantle, 7.7. It's kind of an interesting price for him. He's been actually really good. Doesn't get owned very often. He was a DFS darling on this team for a little while. When none struggles, Fremantle has been the main reason why. That game against Seton Hall just completely detonated. 7-7 feels like a price that I don't know that I want to touch, though. So Xavier guys, which I really like this season for DFS purposes, I'm probably just going to leave them alone for now, unless I'm running like 5+ lineups. On the UConn side, though, Jordan Hawkins, a little bit of Tristan Newton. I think those guys could definitely have some big performances. All right, Seton Hall versus St. John's. St. John's team, man, they've been good to us, especially with Joel Soriano. He wasn't good last slate, but he has been so profitable for us at a low rostership most of the season. He gets a pass for having a really kind of ordinary game against Xavier. 29 fantasy points. That's not even really that bad. Obviously, at 9-1, we want more. He's 9-2 going into a game against Seton Hall that they have a pretty stout front court. It's probably not the time to use him. Do you have to do that? Sorry. Anyways, 40+ fantasy points in 4 of his last 5. Double-digit shots. 9-2 is a high price for him against Seton Hall. Always going to be a large field tournament play. He is going to be low rostered, capable of putting up a big score. Even though Seton Hall has the front court chops to, kind of slow him down, they have DVP-wise given up some nice scores against opposing front court players. That game against Marquette that they just recently lost, Oso Ighodaro had a nice 16-10 performance. Athletic big. Providence, Bryce Hopkins had 24-10. Ed Crosswell had 21-9. That's what led me to thinking that Jack Nunge would have a nice game against them when they played. He actually got completely shut down. Seton Hall hyper-focused on him, but it was Fremantle who had a nice game of 23-9. So you're seeing each game here with an opposing front court player, they're slapping them around a little bit. 15-13 for Jalen Wilson. Kevin McCullough had 17-10. There's just, overall team defense for Seton Hall under Shaheen Holloway. They definitely have, a scary swagger about them, is how I want to phrase that. But there's definitely a path to Joel Soriano having a really nice game here, especially if they get them to play at a higher pace and leads to many rebounds, block shots, stuff like that. So don't sleep on Soriano. Obviously a high price. 31.2% defensive rebounding rate, which is top 3 in the country. That sticks out quite a bit. 6.5% block rate. That sticks out. And he's drawing almost 6 fouls per 40. So definitely the opportunity. And we know with Seton Hall guys, rotating front court a little bit, not necessarily a lack of discipline, but foul trouble galore we see with their front court. If he gets, any of those guys into foul trouble between Ndefo, Samuel, those guys, have to end up sitting. Soriano's going to absolutely feast. So he's my pay up that nobody else will be on kind of every slate, but he's definitely not a priority play. David Jones at 8K, a little bit cheaper if you do want to go with a semi pay up St. John's play. He's been very good, a nice boon for them, taking double-digit shots in pretty much every single game this season. It's coming off a 40 fantasy point performance against Xavier. He's actually scored 37 in 2 of his last 3. Definitely on him to a degree in the large field GBPs or otherwise. I could see using him in a large field as well. The guards are where I'm really backing off of St. John's. As much as I love Posh Alexander and have since his freshman season, the shot hasn't really been there. He, there's a lot to be said about him in the offseason that, he worked on his 3-point shooting. He's going to be a bigger scorer this year. He's not going to have to bring the ball up as much with Andre Curbelo. Defensively, he's still one of the top-tier perimeter defenders in the Big East, but the shooting hasn't been there. 14% from long range, 36% on overall field goals. So it's kind of hurt him a little bit. The price never usually goes down. He's at 7-1 right now. We used to be able to get him at like 6K and sometimes 5-7. If he starts dropping to that level, I'm certainly going to be pulling the trigger on him again. But as of right now, I'm not using him, not using Andre Curbelo. We do have value at the guard spots for St. John's with Dylan Adewusu, who had been playing 20-plus minutes in 3 straight games. just played 17 against Xavier, but still scored 20 fantasy points in that last game. So you have to look at him. And then Montez Mathis, who's sitting there at 3.5. This is a guy that will probably end up being relatively popular. I do have a little bit of a bad feeling about him ending up being a on paper value lock, right? As we say, I've kind of talked about that the last couple of shows, but coming out and throwing up like a 5. It won't be a backbreaker at 3.5, but we certainly need him on a big slate like this to score a minimum of, 10 to 12 fantasy points. And that would be, for cash and single entry. For large field, minimum is going to have to be higher than that. He did play 30 minutes in his last game. He played 31 before that. 3 of his last 5 games, he has eclipsed 30 minutes. If you go back farther than that, he has had like 5 of his last 7. So he's playing a lot of minutes. He's starting to take more shots. Mathis has, kind of been hit or miss in a St. John's uniform, has decent defense, which keeps him on the floor, has a crowded guard and wing rotation, but they're finding him the minutes at 3.5. I think from that standpoint alone, because of the playing time, he's definitely worth using and probably will be a popular option in high dollar single entry and cash games. I just don't have a great feeling about him. Just had to throw that out there. On the Seton Hall side, it's a good matchup. St. John's, they don't scare me. Like, their defense individually is solid, but fantasy-wise, we're seeing guys get off against them. The problem with Seton Hall is I personally, I know Kutri does too, and a lot of other people in the industry have trust issues with the Seton Hall team. They have a deep rotation. They rotate, front court players. The guards kind of end up being a logjam. Kadari Richmond has started to ascend again. We see this with him. Each season he'll become an unstoppable freak of nature, and from a DFS standpoint, and then he'll start falling off again. He's priced at 8-1. Probably not going to be a very smart play, I think, most times in a spot like this where he'll be individually guarded by some of those, violent, defenders on St. John's. But I definitely think he's probably the best overall Seton Hall play. I just don't like the idea of playing, 8-1 for him. Alamir Dawes, Femi Odekale, Dre Davis, no faith in them either. They're priced fairly. Some like Dre Davis at 5.3 is actually kind of decent if we think he gets a spike in minutes, but this isn't a matchup for Seton Hall that I think, they're going to necessarily take advantage of to the point where we need to play them just because the rotation is so big. If they had a rotation, Ed Cooley style rotation of 6 guys, 7 guys, I'd be having a different conversation right now. But Holloway likes to play a lot of guys. We saw it at St. Peter's. That's just his style. All right, moving on, we have Virginia versus Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is going to get stuffed in a locker here, I would imagine. I don't want a lot of exposure to them, even though they have some good talent on their squad. I definitely like guys like Miles Kelly I have for a while. Virginia, dealing with some problems with Reese Beekman. He's been kind of in and out. He has a lingering hamstring issue. Good chance that he ends up missing this game against Georgia Tech. I don't think they would need him. So ordinarily, if he was healthy and good to go, this 6.5 price against this Georgia Tech team would be a big time slam for me personally. I think it's the kind of matchup where he puts up a big time, 11 real. He's not a big time scorer, but like 8 rebounds, 7 assists, 3 steals, a couple blocks. Just one of those classic Reese Beekman lines where he just fills up a stat sheet and suddenly puts up 40 plus, and everybody's like, whoa, I forgot Beek had this in him. If he can't go, there are some value options here for this Virginia team. We've been seeing some additional minutes for certain guys like McNeely. We saw Ryan Dunn playing some more minutes recently as well. McNeely got into the starting lineup with Beek out / dealing with that hammy. Played 28 minutes in that game against Albany. Ryan Dunn off the bench played 18. McNeely taking a decent amount of shots, had 7 shots in that game. I think he's probably the guy to look at. He would get into the starting lineup there, priced at 3.2, near min price. Minutes alone make him a suitable option. If Beek goes, then obviously he kind of gets put back on the back burner. If Beek doesn't go, it also makes Ryan Dunn, who is min price at 3K, a pretty intriguing option. I think both of those guys are going to matter in the future. Right now, there's just not going to be a ton of consistent minutes for them, but they definitely want McNeely to get more time. I did read that they were working in the offseason on fixing his shot. He has a kind of an unconventional jump shot, so they put a lot of time and effort into the development of fixing that. So they want him to be on the court. They want that time to not be wasted. So he's definitely going to be out there. Dunn's more of a guy who's out there in the Beekman mold because he's not scoring a lot, but he's contributing in the glass. He's D'ing up his man. He can get block shots. He can get steals. And they use him for that. So he's earning minutes because of his good, solid defense, which helps on a team coached by Tony Bennett. So that's news that we'll get early on. So we do have some, starting lineups we want to make sure we check with Kentucky, with Virginia, but luckily those are not games that are going to be dragging on throughout the day. We'll have them nice and early. Armand Franklin at 5'3". He's a guy that you always think you can talk yourself into and get a nice score out of him. He showed up against Albany, but it was Albany. He played the 31 minutes, 27.5 fantasy points. A couple of years ago for Indiana, I thought he was going to be turning into a big-time star. I used him a lot. He was a pretty adequate option, but Virginia has just really they use him oddly, and they really wanted him to turn into a Kyle Guy style player, or even Ty Jerome, right? Like one of those type of players, and it just hasn't panned out for him. It's very reliant on scoring. The 5.3 price is definitely intriguing. If it goes down any further and we get into like the 4-5 range, we're really going to be having a decision to make there. But right now, 5.3, I can still get away from him and not feel too bad about it. Jaden Gardner, really popular option the last couple of weeks. Price is creeping up as it should, almost 7K. Can kind of back off there, but don't be surprised if he slugs the hell out of Georgia Tech, especially without Beekman. Still a guy that you can look at using, just a little bit higher of a price there if you want to go with maybe more of a lower owned balance build or something like that. Then he is definitely a guy to look at there at 6.7. Otherwise, on this team, I'm just looking at the cheap guys depending on that Beekman news. Now, for Georgia Tech, ordinarily we don't see Virginia games draw a lot of ownership. Razzle used to come on the show a couple years ago and talk at length about how Virginia, they're involved in these slow-paced games all the time, and they're used to it, and that you can get some fantasy viability out of them, which was a good point. But targeting against them really doesn't end up being a very good choice most of the time. I really, as I mentioned, love Miles Kelly since last season when he showed some flashes to end the year. He's been having a pretty decent month of December. They do have him priced up at 5.8, so it's going to be hard to justify paying that against Virginia. But I do think he has the opportunity to take a ton of shots, and I think that he will. So that makes him the most interesting Georgia Tech play on the board for me. You also have guys like Kyle Sturdivant and Rodney Howard under 5K, but we've pardon the 90s pun, but been there, done that with each of those guys. Don't think I really want to go down that road again. And then you have Jalen Moore, who's priced out at 7K, and then Debo Coleman at 3.6, which is a cheap value-esque price for him, but he hasn't really panned out the way I think a lot of people expected either. Sitting there at that price of 3.6, he did play 27 minutes in their last game. He had a game before that where he played 15, but ordinarily against, non-blowout opponents or in-conference opponents, he's been playing about 25 to 28 minutes. So at 3.6, playing those kind of minutes can eke himself to a 12 to 15 fantasy point score, but you have to realize he is playing against Virginia, lower possessions, lower pace, probably, like I said, getting stuffed in a locker, which is not a fun place to be. All right, Virginia Tech and Wake Forest, a much more exciting game. We got my man Darius Maddox sitting here. Let me check the chat real quick and see who we got here. Steve Boynton knows a lot about Virginia Tech. I think he and I have talked about Darius Maddox for a few times on Twitter. So good to see him on here. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate you. Jody Grant, this is my first show I stayed up for, and you're late. I'm hanging on, though. Love this slate. Yeah, I am on the West Coast, so I do the late thing. It's on demand as well. I appreciate you checking out the show late night, though. It's Friday night. Stay up with us, right? Outside of recruiting and PR, what's Cal's next coaching strength? He can sell. He's a good salesman. I know that's not necessarily a coaching strength, but I guess that falls into the recruiting. So I guess I don't have a third strength for him because he's just so damn good at recruiting and selling the Kentucky dream. Kenny Payne is also the only man in America that gets another year at Louisville after this mess, even though dealt a terrible hand. Yeah, I don't know, man. It'd be pretty trashy on their part to can him. Like, let him have a year. He's like his own people, get his own recruits in there, have it another go. If he falls on his face in another recruiting period for next season, then he's probably just done. But he's got to get another season here. He inherited a really tough situation. Louisville is just in a dumpster right now. But at the very least, with the transfer portal, being like a free agency right now, he can go out and get himself 3 or 4 guards, and he can go into the mid-major level and find himself some pretty nice guards. I don't know if Longwood's Isaiah Wilkins, who has already spent time at the P5 level with Wake Forest, in Virginia Tech, if my memory serves me correctly, a guy like that would be fantastic. So he needs to just go in the upper low major and mid major area and go get some guards. So we'll see what happens with that. Stuck missed half the show. I'm only through like the morning games. I had to pause for a second, so you're not missing a ton. Jody Grant, you're saying some nice, you're giving me a warm, fuzzy feeling. So I appreciate all the kind words there. All right. And then Steve still with us. Cool. Says Kador could miss here. They're being coy about the arm injury. Yeah, that's the popular thing to do with these injuries. So, okay. If Couture misses, that's interesting. But Maddox at 4-1, just came off a game against Boston College, played 40 minutes, been playing pretty heavy minutes. I have him in Dynasty, so I pay attention to him a little bit more. It's not a situation where he's necessarily doing me all that well in Dynasty. I was hoping for more. Padula, obviously, the guy there running the offense. Maddox more of a shooter, but Diz has been adding some rebounds lately. That 4-1 price is nice. The shot attempts for Maddox have been especially nice. 15, 9, 9, and 13 his last 4. So we're really going to have him hit those, more than just 26% for him to probably get close to paying off, because we could see a bad shooting, afternoon and have him still put up 12 at this 4-1 price. If he gets a little bit hot, hits, a couple threes for us, is still keeping up with this, 3 to 5 rebound pace like he has been doing, we could definitely get 20 out of Maddox here and feel pretty good about it. And I just wonder if people will actually use him because of some of the other value that's on the slate for cheaper, and people know Maddox is so reliant on scoring. And if they look at logs, they're going to probably just kind of write him off. So he's the guy I like the best on Virginia Tech, just from a price standpoint. And value return there. So I definitely like him. Of course, my favorite player on Virginia Tech, and everyone's favorite player, I think everyone's, is Justin Mutz. He's awesome. I'm so happy he came back. Just a walking, threat of a triple-double. Stat sheet stuffer, doesn't have to score, but he is scoring a lot more. Just a really good option. 8-1 is a good price for him. He should really be priced up like in the 9K range with some of these other guys. At least I think. So anytime he's priced in this low 8K range, which he's been most of the season, he's just a really solid option. Wake Forest front court has some size, has some dudes, but as far as toughness goes, I think Mutz could definitely push them around a little bit. He's so good at rebounding angles. He's so good at blocking shots. He's just so good at the game of basketball. And he's not that, super athletic guy that's going to get all this NBA hype or anything, but he's one of those collegiate players that just gets it done and doesn't get the respect necessarily from the rest of the industry. So gotta love him at 8-1. One of those guys where you find yourself maybe not building around, but you come into it, you get your values, you get your pay ups, and you end up with that 7.5 to 8.5 range, and you're looking for a last guy or two in. Mutz is a guy that, you're not kicking out of bed at the end of the night in this spot against Wake Forest. You also have Padula higher than him at 8-2. Probably not paying that price for him, but he's been awesome. He is just, I had arguments about with some people about Padula versus Maddox, and I knew Padula was going to be more of a factor because he's going to handle the rock and stuff, but I thought they would score a little bit more in terms of actual points closer together, and that hasn't been the case really. Padula is averaging almost 18 per game, so he's been awesome. But when it comes to that price tag, I'm just going to pay for Mutts instead. I feel a little bit more comfortable. May not be the right choice at the end of the day. Padula may end up outscoring him, but I'm just going to go with what I know there and play Mutts. You have Grant Basile at 7-4. Again, I'm just going to go up and play Mutts. He's been good, but the price on him is just getting a little bit too high for me. That's interesting, though, on Couture. If he ends up sitting, let's see. What would they run for a starting lineup? Let me get into the right page. All right, so some MJ Collins, perhaps. Played 22 minutes last game. Len Kidd played 11 as a main sub for Basile and Mutts. But MJ Collins would be interesting, the freshman there. Really solid on the glass in their couple of conference games, playing a little bit more, 20-ish, low 20 minutes. So maybe we'll see some spikes there depending on that Couture news. He's sitting there at 3-2, yet another speculative value guy that we can maybe look at in a spot where, we're playing him for the minutes, not necessarily the value. And it's more just understanding that we're playing somebody like that more for what he can let us do with the rest of our lineup, as opposed to sitting here and relying on him to carry. I see it so many times. I like to tilt as much as anybody in the Discords and social media, but I see these unreasonable expectations sometimes for these guys. What's going on with Collins? He's got 4 fantasy points at halftimes. Well, he's MJ Collins, number one. Number two, like, if you're relying on him to score 30 for you, you're building probably incorrectly, or you need to align your expectations a little bit differently. I do like that idea of using him, though, if you're not looking to use like a Maddox type play. On the Wake Forest side, man, you got to give it up to Coach Forbes. He just knows how to work the portal, and he does it better than anyone else. You would have never thought that team last year would be as good as it would. You never thought that Alondas Williams, a career role player, would be a conference player of the year, but here we are. He yanks Tyree Appleby away from Florida, and don't get me wrong, Appleby was probably better than Alondas Williams throughout his career at Cleveland State and Florida. So it's not maybe necessarily the same as going from a straight role player to a stud, but he's playing way better than he did at Florida most of the time, having a really strong season for Wake Forest. He's been really awesome. So it's kind of deja vu for me there. Also, Andrew Carr has been really good from Delaware. Just the guy just works the portal like no other. So I like Appleby at 7-4. I think this matchup against Virginia Tech, it could be a little scary on paper, this reputation for the Hokies of having a strong defense, but they definitely have a fantasy-friendly unit you can definitely target against them. I think that Appleby at 7-4 is a reasonable play to use. Looking at it, he leads the team in usage at 26.5%, has an assist rate which is top 50 in the country at 32.5%, drawing almost 6 fouls per 40, and he's making 43% of his threes on 54 attempts. That is a career high. In the past, when he was at Florida, he was about a mid-30s shooter, and at Cleveland State, he was a kind of like low to mid-30s shooter. So the fact that he's shooting, mid-40s almost has shown major improvement. He's playing almost a career high in minutes played as well. Assist rate is also a career high, and he has just been thriving under Coach Forbes. I just love the way that Steve Forbes coaches. Damari Monsanto, his price continues to creep up, sitting there at 5-6. After 2 straight 27-plus fantasy point games against Duke and Rutgers, 5-6 is a good price for him. I think that he's probably the primary Wake Forest play that I want to use. Do I want to stack them? Not necessarily too big of a slate, even though I am a big fan of stacking in college basketball. I think it works more often than it doesn't if you do it right. If I can only play one, I'm taking that discount on Monsanto. Very, very gifted shooter. high shot rate, highest on the team at 32%, which is top 30 in the country, shooting almost 40% from long range. He has found himself in the doghouse a couple of times, inexplicably, benched or not playing in a game. Did start last game against Duke, has been playing, mid to upper 20s minutes. Okay, have to take another break. 1 second. So. All right. So I think he's the best play. Other Wake Forest guys, Matthew Marsh, a value guy at 4.7. We're seeing Marsh start to factor into what Wake Forest is doing more. The last 4 games, he's been over 20 minutes, only over 20 fantasy points in one of those games, but I had a 30 against LSU, which is impressive. And then right around 18 and 19 against Duke in 27 minutes, 10 points, 5 rebounds. So 4.7, they're relying on Marsh a lot more, and they're going to definitely need his presence against his Virginia Tech front court. Andrew Carr at 6.2. I like that play as well. GPP wise, he's playing heavy minutes, 35 plus in 3 straight. His rates haven't dipped. You see transfers when they come up from a lower tier conference like he did at Delaware, you tend to see a drop off. There's certainly guys who excel, but I think more often than not, you see rates just kind of tumble for certain guys, and he was a prime candidate for that to happen. But looking at it, his usage rate right on par with his career numbers, shot rate right on par with his career numbers. His rebounding rate is actually up slightly. His block rate a little bit down. 3-point shooting a little bit down, but for the most part, he's basically been the same player against upper tier competition. So again, that has to fall on Steve Forbes, his coaching ability and being able to get the most out of these guys. 28 plus fantasy points in 2 of last 3 for Andrew Carr. The game against Duke, he was just really good. Looked awesome against the younger group of Duke, and just totally, making them look befuddled that time. So can't sleep on him at 6.2 either. If ever there was a team in this first wave of games to stack, I think Wake Forest mini stack is certainly in play, whether that's like an Appleby, Monsanto, a Marsh, Hildreth, who I also like Hildreth quite a bit. Not so much at 6.5 compared to some of these other guys, but Hildreth has been awesome as well. Pretty consistently scoring over 20 fantasy points, has not been talked about by many. Taking double-digit shots in every single game except for, I think, or in December is what I should say. Every single game in December has been really, really good. Looking to push the pace a little bit. Has been a better defender. I really like what Hildreth offers on a team where he kind of gets lost in the shuffle and people don't really talk about. So I kind of like this Wake Forest team. One guy I don't like on this Wake Forest team, and I might be the only one in the industry, although he has hurt the feelings of many, is Davion Williamson. His minutes have kind of fluctuated. His, health has been up and down, in and out of the starting lineup. Hurt people as chalk. He's thrown up 3 out of his last 4 single-digit performances, sitting there at 4.8. Unless he were to, jump back into the starting lineup, I think that I personally would have zero interest either way. But I think that, unless he does jump into that starting lineup, we won't see much ownership on him. And I don't think that he's a very good play compared to the rest. It is good to see in a close game like that against Duke, the rotation being about 6 to 7 guys. Looks like Forbes is going to ride his starters, and he's going to ride them really, really heavily. And that's what we want to see. Wake Forest had a game against Appalachian State where they were pushed to the brink. They only won by 1. And in that game, they basically ran a 6-man rotation. So you can really comfortably roll with these Wake Forest guys in a multitude of ways, multiple lineups, various combinations. I like their starting 5 quite a bit. All right, Texas Tech versus TCU. I am a huge Daniel Batcho guy. His price keeps creeping up. It's getting tough to continue to swallow that price point as he sits there at now 8.3, but he continues to perform. And as long as he's healthy and as long as he's in the starting 5, as he jumped back in last game, I'm going to be inclined to get exposure. He has been really, really good. Just a breakout season for him. we're going to get to a point with his price where it's going to be probably, time to jump off, but I don't think I'm quite there yet at 8-3 to where I want to jump off of him in a game that should be close. Looking at it, rates 21% usage, 19.5% shot rate, top 30 defensive rebounding rate at 26.7%, a combined rate of 37%, a block rate of 7.3. And he's just drawing about 5.5 fouls per 40. So as a sophomore, almost 7-footer after kind of, being a role player last year, we saw him in the non-con playing like 15 to 20 minutes, and he had a couple of flashes. Yeah, would it make a highlight play each game, but not really a factor, especially in conference play. And to see him, blow up like this is really kind of cool. I like this Texas Tech group, and for me, Daniel Batcho is the guy. Kevin Obanner, he's obviously crushing it as well. He is just a little bit too high priced for me, I think, at the 8. He has put up 40+ fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. But, the Texas Tech non-con schedule we talked about this last time I was on the show with the Texas Tech slate. It's just been really pretty weak. The game against Creighton and Ohio State on neutral court, that's great, but they lost both of those. And then you're looking at, games against Louisville, Georgetown, Eastern Washington, Jackson State, Houston Christian, South Carolina State. Not a lot to help the old resume there. So they're really jumping into conference play now with very minimal, tests. And the 2 tests that they really had, they ended up not winning them against Creighton and Ohio State. So that does worry me here against a very talented TCU team. But I think at the end of the day, this Texas Tech squad will end up being a pretty strong program that wins 20 games. Other options to look at, Davian Harmon, 7-9, may be a little bit high priced. He's played well. I prefer the front court options on this team, whether that's, Kevin O or Daniel Batcho. All 3 of those guys, clearly the top fantasy options here. Pop Isaacs and Jalen Tyson's, old Pop. Those guys are priced up now. We're not getting a lot of upside there anymore. Tyson has a ton of athleticism. Isaacs has good court vision, but playing them at 4.7 is a lot different than paying 6.4 and 6.2. And then those value guys like KJ Allen, Lamar Washington, unless there is another injury that pops up or a change in the starting lineup or some other occurrence, it's going to be hard to really value those guys unless it's a blowout. KJ Allen's minutes with Daniel Batcho around have fallen way down. Lamar Washington's still probably the safest of the bench options, but he's still kind of a lower level value compared to what we've already covered so far. TCU side of things, I'm not going to make it a habit of targeting against Texas Tech's defense very often. That is something I am prepared to stick to. However, I will recognize that sometimes a price is so cheap or low enough that I have to strongly consider it, and especially if a guy is borderline matchup proof, as Mike Miles may have to be considered. He's sitting there at 7.2, which is a solid price for him. He has clearly taken over as the alpha on this team the last couple of seasons. We saw those flashes during his freshman year. He has missed some games on and off. He missed one in early November, or a couple in November. Then he missed one in early December. So he's been in and out, but we are seeing him play, out of the starting lineup the last 4 games, a couple of blowouts where he played low 20s minutes. Against SMU and Utah in those last 2, he did play mid-30s. So, again, a close game. We can expect him to play heavy minutes. SMU, they're not tough. Utah's defense, debatable if they're tough. 18, 3 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 steals, and a block for him there. I would have liked to have seen him maybe priced just a tad higher to where I could actually entertain the fade in my main a little bit more. But I really like that price for him at 7.2. He feels like a strong play there and inevitably playing 35 minutes, and he may not come out at all. Seems like he'll coast into a 30 there on volume alone. It's weird seeing Damian Bow at 8.5 compared to Miles at 7.2. And I'm a big Damian Bow fan. I really like him. He's playing quite well this year, but 8.5 against Texas Tech, we're not doing that. Other guys, Manuel Miller at 6.4 after a kind of spotty start to the season. up and down performances. He's looked really good. 37 plus in back-to-back games, playing more minutes. They're going to definitely need him against that Texas Tech front court. Looking at let's take a look at his foul rate here, because that's what's going to be important. It's pretty low, 2.4, so we may not have to worry about that too much. Lowest of his career so far. Just that Texas Tech front court is vicious. So I worry a little bit there. He's a bit undersized as well and has to play some 4 and 5 at times when guys like Eddie Lampkin do get into foul trouble. Chuck O'Bannon at 6'1" is your GPP type play. He has had some really solid games this month of December. They also have had kind of a weaker schedule lately after playing some Providence, Iowa types. In those games, O'Bannon kind of struggled. Against Utah, he had one of his best games of the season, and he's looked pretty well, scoring 20-plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 5. So I do like his play style for tournaments at that 6'1" price point. And then you got your Eddie Lampkins, Coles, guys like that, but they're not really moving the needle for me. All right, so that's the first half of the slate. We'll start speeding through here in a minute. Let me pull that up for you, Jody. So they're 95th in tempo ranking. They're for Wake Forest. They're not playing as fast as they did last season, and that's because their personnel is a little bit different than it was last season. But they're definitely still on the faster side when it comes to the ACC. All right, so FSU versus Duke. Man, the morphine drip for Florida State. They have dealt with a myriad of injuries. They have dealt with inconsistency. 4-10 record for old Leonard Hamilton was not what I was expecting. I thought last season was more of an outlier for him. 17-14, a very mediocre year. I thought they would bounce back with the talent they had, but just the amount of injuries that they've suffered, it's hard to come back from that. To start the season, Jalen Gainey was going to be a big piece of this team. Lose him, don't get him for a single game. Cam Fletcher, who was really good, lose him for the year. Baba Miller, we knew was going to, miss time with that, at the beginning of the year. That was well known. So they haven't been able to have, the talented youngster there. They're dealing with issues with Naheem McLeod. They're dealing with inconsistencies at the guard positions with Caleb Mills, who is playing better lately, but still hard to trust him. Jalen Worley, who's always a value at each and every slate. And it's just, you're kind of gritting your teeth when you click him into your lineup because he's capable of really torpedoing you even at the cheap price point. Here he is again at 4.2. Just a really tough spot to like the Florida State guys. Hamilton is he has been a torturer of DFS players in the industry for a long time because of his ridiculously large and deep rotation. He would find walk-ons and play them, randomly 20 minutes and just do us in like that. But now he's in a position where he's running out of bodies and he's literally forced to play the starting lineup most of the game. Against Notre Dame, and they gutted that one out. They played their starters, all 5 of them, between Cameron Corhan, Jalen Worley, Matthew Cleveland, Darren Green, and Caleb Mills, 31-plus minutes. Nobody else from the bench played over 8. So you love to see that from a DFS standpoint. That's the total polar opposite of what we're used to for Leonard Hamilton. Now, if Naheem McLeod is available and good to go, that will stretch it out a little bit, but they're still going to be looking at 6 to 7 guys, which is why we have to talk about Jalen Worley at 4.2 because he's going to be on the floor a lot. Frustrating thing about him is fantasy point per minute wise, he can sometimes be out there for 31 minutes and put up, 10 fantasy points. But we're really chasing minutes here with him. He's going to be on the floor for probably a minimum of 30 because of the lack of options they have there. He does have a tendency to get a little bit excitable on the perimeter, especially in reach. That is something I've noticed when I watch Florida State games as he picks up ticky-tack fouls. You would hate to see that happen to you with 2 early ones or something, but I don't think they'll have a choice. They'll have to play through it. But at 4.2 at value wise, he's certainly the one of the top values on the slate, just from a standpoint that we know he's going to be on the floor a lot and he's going to have to take shots. He's going to have to contribute. Caleb Mills is your next option. Just from an overall, fantasy standpoint, anytime he's under 7K, which he's been most of the season, you have to consider him. He's going to take a ton of shots. Occasionally he'll have a big assist game, but really he's scoring reliant. He's not hitting those 30+ numbers like we had seen in prior times, but he is hitting that 20 to 25 range a lot. At 6'8", he can pay that off for sure. I don't think he's necessarily for me, like a big GPP type play, because I don't think he's hitting that number a lot, but in that single entry category, or if there's enough cash games to go around, we're not cannibalizing each other. He's a guy that's going to be pretty safe in that regard. Darren Green at 7K, shooter, comes over from UCF. He's played well. 7K though, just okay. Matthew Cleveland at 8K. That's going to be a pretty tough sell for me. I do think he's going to score, like a minimum of 25 to nearly 30, which definitely puts him in play at the 8K price. But it's just a matter of how we're going to spend our funds. That particular price range of 8K is absolutely loaded. I just couldn't envision myself using him over Justin Mutz. And there's a couple other options here in the back end of the slate that we're going to get into as well. So it's just a matter of he falls below some others on the priority list for me. But if you were to place him in your lineup as the last guy in, you would get no arguments from me. I'll be clear about that. Cameron Corhan at 4.3, if McLeod's out or limited and he gets the start again, he's certainly in play. 31 minutes last game, 30 fantasy points. A lot of these interior players are having some pretty damn big games against Notre Dame, so we're seeing that consistently, and he was able to have a nice 18-7 game against them. He has played double-digit minutes so not double digits, but 15+ in 6 of his last 7. Getting the start there, playing, even if McLeod plays, we're probably still looking at a 15 to 18 minutes for him. At 4.3, he's not as exciting of a play as he was when he was like 3-4 earlier on, but definitely a guy that we can use and feel okay about it. A natural pivot off a more popular Jalen Warley. Different positions, but just value-wise, we can, have ourselves a little bit of a difference there. If Warley comes out and throws up a single-digit performance, which he can sometimes do, and Corrin has one of those massive bust-out games that he's shown he has the capability of, you're going to be well ahead of the rest of the field. All right, Duke side of things, man. The last time Duke was on the slate, just the absolute destruction that they had on the bankrolls of many, myself included. They're just the just trashy performance by a lot of their guys. Jacob Granderson was a guy I was heavy on. A lot of people were at 3.5. I knew better than to do it, but what can I say? He was absolutely awful. Tyrese Proctor, who had a decent amount of ownership, he wasn't necessarily awful, but 3X, obviously not going to get done. Just this Duke team, they don't do it for me. I'm not big on them for DFS going forward. I am not paying almost 9K for Flip, even though he's been really good for them. My favorite player on this team overall is Mark Mitchell, and he has been since the McDonald's All-American game. I thought he had the overall game and just had that look of a collegiate guy. Like, I don't see him being a one and done like some of these other guys. He'll come back like Mark Williams or one of, somebody like that, and have a really big collegiate season next year. So I'm pretty excited about that. I think he's a really good basketball player at this level. 5.4 is a good price for him. I think he is definitely a main team viable guy, depending on how that news shakes out with Lively. He's been dealing with some issues. Whitehead's been dealing with some issues. Both ended up missing that game against Wake Forest, which obviously threw off a lot of what they do there. They looked very bad without those guys, but even with them, it's not as if they've been world beaters just yet, and that's because they're still getting acclimated to the collegiate game. They're still working through some ailments, issues, things of that nature. If they end up playing, they're both under 5K. Definitely worth a shot in GPP, but I'm not looking at a lot of main team guys here. We could possibly talk ourselves into yet another low 3K guy. There are several on this slate, none of them necessarily mega locks, but they're potential looks for main lineups. Jalen Blakes has played 20 plus minutes in 3 of his last 4 games, which includes a pretty damn big performance. He was hot from long range, 17 real, 33 fantasy points. Don't expect a repeat of that. That would be unrealistic. But at 3-2, he can certainly get 12 to 14 fantasy points and pay that off, especially if they're missing guys. We're seeing still continued ineffectiveness from the Grandison Proctor, group. Clearly they see something with Blake's there where they're going to give him some additional minutes. He is, a veteran. He has, a lot of basketball under his belt. He's not a total scrub. And when I say veteran, he's, 2 years in. Just made a joke, one and done's, Duke and Kentucky. But he's been good. And I think that they're looking to use him more, shooting 37% from long range just gives them another look. Somebody who can continue to develop and deserves more minutes. So you can possibly use him. It's not really a veteran, but you guys get it. All right, next game on the slate. And this is one that has some sneaky sneak. I really love the idea of targeting against Marquette, their front court especially. Oso Ighodaro, he is really good offensively and obviously, can work the glass. We've seen him put up some really monstrous performances on the glass against Notre Dame. There's Notre Dame again, 18 rebounds. Last game it's the Hall, 16 and 10, 43 fantasy points. Like, he's really good, but they definitely get smacked around by opposing front court players or just wings who can rebound. Players who aren't afraid to mix it up down in the paint, have a little bit of athleticism, can do a plethora of things from, scoring in the paint to dragging a guy out on the perimeter and knocking down a 3. And Villanova definitely has a guy like that. His name's Cam Whitmore, and he's not going to have any rostership ownership at all. He's priced in the mid 6K range. The reason people aren't going to be looking at him is because, coming into the season, he, obviously missed time, a lot of time, hasn't started a single game yet, has been coming off the bench, which automatically turns people off. There's a good portion of the industry that is wired to, if they don't start, I can't use them. And it's kind of a hamstring type thing, but it is tough because sometimes when a guy doesn't start, like, you have that feeling in the back of your head, like, is he going to play? Whitmore has played 20 plus minutes in all but one game. The one game he didn't against St. Joe's, he played 19. So basically 20 minutes. He has an extremely high usage rate of almost 30%, an extremely high shot rate of almost 32%. 3-point shot has not been there for him yet. He's shooting about 24% on 25 attempts. I expect that number to start improving, but I'm looking at the rebounding numbers and efficiencies for Cam Whitmore, and this is where I get a little bit excited. And he's definitely trending towards being the posh play of the day because of this. I'm a sucker for DBP, especially if it's on the rebounding side of things. There can be a lot of variance with the rebounding category. I realize that, but sometimes the stars align with a very strong matchup and a kid who has proven himself to be strong in one particular category. He does have a combined rebounding rate over 30%. In his 2 Big East games, he has been really strong on the offensive glass, offensive rebounding rate over 12%, which is 7th in the conference. We're talking 2 games, though. Really expecting him to eventually work his way into the starting lineup. I think right now they're treating him with, they've got training wheels on him and got a bubble around him. They're treating him like a bubble boy because they don't want to mess around and end up, risking further damage to this, star player of theirs that they need to have play more minutes. There is news recently, Angelo Breezy, who is 3-star for Villanova, entered the portal. Not a huge news there, but just another guy that's, playing a few minutes here or there. That's out. Villanova, it's clear to see that life without Jay Wright is very tough. You look at Duke and you see without Coach K, like that's a well-oiled machine of a program. They can bring in someone else, and obviously they're a disciple and a mini Coach K and John Shire, so they're still ripping and running. But with Villanova, you don't just replace Jay Wright at a program like Villanova, and Kyle Neptune, God bless him, is trying his best, but they're just struggling. And I can't help but wonder what Jay Wright would have done with this roster. And I think in my heart of hearts that he would be much better than 7-6 with this roster. It's not a bad unit, right? We're looking at, let's look at their last game against Connecticut. Brandon Slater, Eric Dixon, Caleb Daniels, Mark Armstrong, who's worked his way in the starting lineup but has not been having a very good freshman season. And then, Chris Archie, who's starting and playing 30 minutes, shouldn't be. We need to see more Jordan Longino. He played 28 minutes off the bench. That was good, although he got into foul trouble. And then Cam Whitmore played 20. Those are the guys playing. It's a 7-man rotation at this moment in time without Justin Moore. So I want to see Cam Whitmore's minutes go up if they can stop treating him, like a bubble boy, because you're looking at the rest of this roster and it's definitely lacking upper tier talent. However, I have such respect for Jay Wright. I do think he would have a better record than it stands right now. Now, the risk with Whitmore is the fact that, coming off the bench, he could see 19 minutes. Coming off the bench, he could see, maybe this is where they unleash him and play him 30 minutes. He did play his most amount against Boston College in a pretty much a blowout win in that particular game, 77-56. He did play 26 minutes. Usage rate in that game was 30%, but he looked very comfortable shooting the basketball, scored 19 real, 7 rebounds, had a steal, 3 of 6 from downtown, got himself to the foul line, 6 of 8 from the foul line. That's where this is going to work out for us. We need him, if we're going to use him, to not only take advantage of this DVB spot on the glass and get, a minimum of 6 to 7 rebounds, which is definitely possible, but we need him to be generating points when on the floor. And the best way to do that without that clock ticking away and him, having to take a water break is getting to the foul line early and often, churning out and generating those real points at the foul line, because that's just those freebies without the clock running. Then he gets to stay on the floor for longer. So that's where we're really going to be successful with this one. I think that 6-6 price is really nice for him. He's been hanging around that. I mean, early on in the season, you couldn't use him because they had him priced high because of his pedigree, but then drops down into that low 6K range, a couple of 30s early on, gets him up to 7K. Now he drops down a few hundred. This spot against Marquette is just really good for Cam Whitmore. I really like him. This spot could also be really good for a guy like Eric Dixon, a capable rebounder in his own right, has been forced into playing a lot more than I think ordinarily he would be because of the lack of other options on the team. And at 7-2, he's a capable guy. Give us 28 to 30 fantasy points in a spot like this. So I also like Eric Dixon quite a bit. Good DVP spot for him as an adequate rebounder. As well, you have Brandon Slater sitting there at 6'3". I would rather play Cam Whitmore, even though Slater's going to play more. We know Slater's just an up and down performer. More often than not, going to give us like a 15. So let me try the more unknown with Whitmore and hope that this is going to be the game that Neptune, unleashes him for 30 plus minutes. If we nail that game, he's just absolutely going to torch the slate. I'm very confident in that. Longino is sitting there as another 3-2 min price, 3-3 type of player. Going to get those minutes, 23 to 25 minutes, capable of getting 15 to even 20 fantasy points. I do think he's a little bit better of a value option than people will probably realize in this spot against Marquette. I think there's going to be a good amount of points scored here. So I'm looking at a possible mini stack of Villanova, because for me, Jordan Longino at 3-3 is just a very intriguing price point. He really should probably be starting over Armstrong, who's just really struggling to get acclimated to the collegiate game. So we'll see how that turns out in this game when the starting lineups come out. But I'm definitely looking at Longino there and Cam Whitmore as a super sneak at 6'6", because people just aren't going to use him. On the flip side, Villanova, teams against them have been able to, get off on the glass as well. There's a DVP spot there. Villanova's offensive rebounding efficiency is near the bottom of D1. They have certainly struggled to contain pretty much anyone. Soriano had 11 rebounds against them recently, 4 blocks. The game against UConn, that was the one that Sonogo kind of let a lot of people down, myself included. But Hawkins and Andre Jackson both had solid games, especially on the glass. This is a spot where we can definitely look at in tournaments for me, Oso Ighodaro, to continue his kind of, trajectory of becoming a breakout, star player for this team. 7-9 is a tough price to pay. He can definitely put up a big score, though, in this spot. And he's been able to take advantage of, not necessarily soft teams, but soft spots on the court or chinks in the armor for certain defenses. Seton Hall, the 43, Providence, 31, 46 against Notre Dame. Just really solid scorer, really solid on the glass, a capable shot blocker. So definitely a good, solid GPP look here that probably won't see a ton of attention either because of that price point. And that 8K range is just absolutely loaded with plays. You have Cam Jones, you have Tyler Kolek. They're both priced up. I'm probably not using Prosper. Pretty much everyone's priced up. I do like the idea of using David Joplin a little bit, but I had a build with him recently, and then he ended up only playing 17 minutes. However, he did take 11 shots, and the reason I do look at him a little bit is the fact that he takes a high number of shots regardless of his playing time, has a shot rate of 27.6%, is shooting 44% from long range, just has the green light to come out there and gun. If he were ever, to spike upwards of, 25 to 26 minutes, he would absolutely just detonate. So I do like the idea of potentially, rolling him out in 1 or 2 builds. But as far as a main lineup goes, Longino is really the guy to look at. And then Whitmore is my sneak. I haven't decided if he's going to be the posh play, but man, this is a spot for him. Arizona versus Arizona State. You have the other Hurley brother on here, the way worse Hurley brother. Although I guess he's the way better Hurley brother because he's better at being a Hurley than his brother because he's a total asshole and he's just an unlikable guy. So I guess he's better at being a Hurley than his brother. Warren Washington at 6'8". Ordinarily, I'd look at that and say, yeah, there's some upside there, but he's staring down at a front court of the Wildcats that's probably going to gobble him up and send him to the bench with foul trouble, almost assuredly. DJ Horn, 6'6", probably your best option here. I hate this spot for Arizona State. I think that they're actually terrible for this slate. They have some guys, some really talented guys. Frankie Collins, 27.4% usage rate, 33% shooter from long range. They have the Cambridges. We're starting to see the Nevada version, of Desmond, who we hadn't seen for the beginning part of the season. He kind of, was looking like maybe he lost his powers. But now he's playing a lot better the last, 5-6 games in the month of December. He has definitely got his mojo back, but he's priced appropriately. Going up against Arizona, I'm not as scared to use perimeter players against them as I am front court, but, there's just such a log jam of viable plays in that same price range that I'm probably not using him, even though I'm okay with it. Because that's where you want to use guys if you're going to target Arizona is on the perimeter. Now on the Arizona side, I definitely have some interest here. We're paying up. We have to, if we want to use Tubelis, we're paying 9.3. If we want to use Balo, we're paying 8.9. Every time Arizona's on the slate, I have to give it up because I was so wrong about Omar Balo. But Tommy Lloyd knows what he's doing with these big men coming into a season after being role players or relatively unused. And Balo has just been absolutely awesome. Can you imagine if he was playing this well and still on Gonzaga and allowing Drew Timme to play more of that finesse style he likes, jeez, man, that's just nuts. Ballo's awesome, though. He's played really well. Combined rebounding rate of 34%, block rate over 6%. Really good shooter because all of his stuff is dunks or bunnies, 75% from the field, top 3 in effective field goal percentage, top 12 in true shooting percentage because of that. As Tubelis, 8 on the Ken Palm Player of the Year rankings. Rates-wise, he has a higher usage rate, higher shot rate than Ballo. Rebounding rate pretty in line with Ballo at 33%. Drawing about 5.5 fouls per 40, has a block rate of 3.5%. So, they both are in line to have a solid game here. It's just, and the prices are so close. It's just a matter of which you like better. Ballo is actually drawing 7.5 fouls per 40, which is 10th best in the country, which is why I said Warren Washington's going to end up watching this game from the bench a lot because he's just going to end up being in foul trouble. I think I am personally leaning a little bit more towards Ballo because I think he will just chew up all Arizona front court players. Tubelis, not that he's been passive at all, but I think that he would be more inclined or more likely to put up like a 25 to 30 score here, where Ballo's going to put up like a 40. And you look at Tubelis and you say, what are you talking about? He scored 40 plus in 3 of the last 5. Yes, absolutely. Fully capable of doing so in this spot. But I don't know. I like the Ballo interior devastation that he's going to cause Arizona State. Like, it's going to be heinous to watch if you're a Sun Devils fan, but they're both in play. Tubella is probably more of the main team guy typically, but I really like Ballo in this spot. Gone are the days of using Kirk Crease at like 4.7 a couple of seasons ago. That's tough. Paying almost $7K for him is a no for me, even though the matchup's fine. 600 less, we can play Courtney Ramey, and we're getting a guy who is scoring more fantasy points, contributing, a little more consistently throughout, has a shot rate over 21%, shooting a whopping 45% from long range, just, comes over from Texas and is really thriving in the Pac-12, which is what we see a lot of guys do when they come to the Pac-12, honestly. I would rather play him for the discount, though. And then we're looking at, Pele Larson, 6'2", Seti Henderson at 5'4". Like, those guys are all just priced up, and we're not getting a ton of upside there. Safer options, great matchup, definitely in play. But we're just going to have a hard time really justifying any of those guys. If you're using an Arizona guy, I think it just has to be Tubelis or Ballo right now. They're so similar. I think that they're going to score pretty close. So it's just a matter if you think you need to save $400 or just take the guy that you like best when it comes to Arizona. All right, just a handful of games left. Let's check in here. Ooh, X-Girls XYZ, private photo here. All right. Be talking to you after the show. No, I'm just kidding. It's just a bot, obviously. All right, so Oklahoma State versus Kansas. Starting with the Oklahoma State guys. Price-wise, did you ever think that you would be considering paying $8K for Mo Cisse? Maybe not in this spot. Fouls are always going to be lingering over him. But, man, he has realized his potential as a vicious rebounder, a shot blocker extraordinaire, just a really nice season that he's having for this Oklahoma State team. Usage and shot rates not going to be there for him, but he is going to get a lot of dunks and putbacks. That's his game. Rebounding wise, he just owns the glass. He actually has, let me double check here. Yep, that's right. The number 1 defensive rebounding efficiency rate in the country at 31.6%. A combined rate well over 40%. A block percentage that's in the top 10 region at 13.2% as well. Foul rates sitting there at 3.8. He's drawing about 3.7, pretty close there. His foul rate's actually down. So at Memphis, it was 5.1. Like, you would count on him as a freshman to pick up 2 instant fouls. Last year, it was hit or miss at 4.5. This year at 3.8. So he's definitely worked hard to not pick up ticky-tack fouls, really get himself in a position to defend well without fouling and block shots, without just, slapping the guy in the arm or being caught in a bad position or out of position where you're just going to end up being called for a foul because you're not at the right spot. So that's good to see. I do find it difficult to think that I'll be able to get there because, again, he's another 7-8 to 8K price point guy. And going up against Kansas, that's never easy. But GPP wise, hell yeah, Cisse could absolutely end up, putting up a huge one here, and they're going to need him to. And then you have, Caleb Boone, who is not doing well with his foul rate. He's just, you can almost always count on him to get into foul trouble. He does have an extremely nice rebounding rate as well, 15% on the offensive rebounding side, which is top 40, block rate of 5%. So he's doing his thing there just to a lesser extent than Cisse, but he has a higher usage rate and a high shot rate. Guards wise, Avery Anderson, Bryce Thompson, John Michael Wright. That's the trio of guys you're really looking at there. I like Avery Anderson a lot. He hasn't quite continued his explosion that he showed last year. He's having a lot of low 20s games. That's making him more of a low end play typically. However, he is fully capable at any time of putting up a big score. And we saw him, against Virginia Tech. He looked pretty solid, 15, 2 and 4. His last time out, 10 points, 9 assists, 5 rebounds. He's adding elements to his game and not just being pigeonholed into the scorer role. So I definitely like him a lot for that reason. He falls into that, GPP-like category. Bryce Thompson, price had continued to fall there for a while, and he got into the 4K range. Now he's pretty appropriate at 5'5", 5'8", probably should be up over 6K at this point. Back-to-back games, over 25 fantasy points. I do like him at that 5'8" price point, but I'm again a little lukewarm on the Cowboys as a whole in the spot against Kansas. And then at 3-1, you have Chris Harris, who has played 18 minutes in back-to-back games. I think that more of a product of opponents the last couple of matchups have been a little bit on the easier side. But again, you have another GPP value in the low 3K range, min price, that isn't necessarily horrible. On the Kansas side, KJ Adams has been ridiculously good. I think I'm a little sad about that because I think I missed my window to really be able to utilize that properly. They've got him priced at 6.5, so I'm not using him here against Oklahoma State. He's got really good secondary and peripheral stats. He's starting to score more as well. He's just a really solid option. When Jalen Wilson ends up, going to the next level, I think KJ Adams is going to become an absolute star. Looking at it, a offensive rebounding rate over 10%, block rate of 4.5%, steal rate of 3%. Does get called for 4.3 fouls per 40, so that will be an aspect of his game he will have to work on. But almost a 70% shooter from the field. Doesn't really take threes, but gets a lot of inside looks, bunnies, dunks, layups, that kind of thing. We like those players, but we like them when they're priced, at the 5.3 or 5.5 range. And he was definitely in that range as early as a couple of weeks ago, but I think we might have missed the bus there. So that's tough to use him now. Using Jalen Wilson at 9.1, as good as he's been, I think that's a little bit tough for me. I have some other pay-ups that I think I prefer. Kevin McCullough at 7.6. As long as he remains healthy, he is just a fantasy dynamo. The problem is he ends up with these little nicks and ailments and, muscle strains and hammy pulls and just whatever you name it. But his last 4 games, he's been phenomenal, and those have been against opponents that are not necessarily slouches. But looking at it, 40-plus fantasy points in 4 straight. The Tennessee game, he was pretty ordinary, borderline not good. But Seton Hall, Missouri, Indiana, and Harvard. Now, Harvard, okay, we can throw that out. But Seton Hall, Missouri, Indiana, all three of those teams are solid. Missouri, especially, playing well. Indiana has played well, and Seton Hall, despite being 7-7, they're a very tough 7-7 team that most people don't want to play. And he's performed quite well. So he's been that way his entire career. When he's at Texas Tech, when he is a healthy member of the team and they've able to give him 28 to 30 minutes, he's just performing at a high level. He is able to stuff the stat sheet. The rebounding lately by him has I don't want to say necessarily been a surprise, but it's definitely on the higher side of his career, and he's just going gangbusters in that area. 10 plus rebounds in 3 of his last 4, 11 plus real points in 4 straight. So he's performing at a pretty high level. 7'6". Did we miss the lower range for him? Perhaps, but we haven't also had him at a very cheap price very often. The beginning of the season, yes, he was getting healthy, whatever, but 7'6", that's just again, I want another tougher price where it's a logjam of players. If I'm using someone from Kansas, it's probably going to be him, honestly, and not Jalen Wilson. And that might be a mistake because we'll have the available salary for Jalen Wilson. But I just want that a little bit of savings. My mind's just programmed to continue to find savings where I can. I think McCullough has a chance to match or exceed what Jalen Wilson does. DeJuan Harris, Grady Dick, they're all priced up. Just not a lot to look at there. So moving on, Baylor, Iowa State. The Baylor side, Keontae George. Give me some Key George here at 6'9". I like the idea of using him and Cam Whitmore in that sub 7K range. Iowa State defense has some really scary guys on it for sure. As a team defense, they're able to contain their opponents, but Key George deserves to be considered at this point, even as a youngster, borderline matchup proof, because he's able to contribute in multiple categories and he's playing, quite a bit minutes. There is an opportunity for him to play even more with LJ Cryer, dealing with a concussion in the protocol. So concussions, that's kind of one of those things where you're concussed or you're not. So we are dealing with that as a middle of the slate type game, back end, late hammer in the morning, right? So we'll have to wait and see how that news breaks out. If Cryer ends up playing, it definitely diminishes some of what Key George brings in terms of shot attempts. But it won't take away from his rebounding ability and assists and those other aspects of his game. But he would be happily, as a DFS owner, seeing him play from 32 minutes, which is already solid, to probably like 37 to 38, which would be even more of a smash. At 6'9", if he's looking at 38 to 39 minutes, he's scoring 40 fantasy points and just blowing the doors off the slate. So I am definitely keeping my eye on that news, but I may just end up playing Key George anyways. Like, I'm that confident in his ability in this price point. Adam Flagler, same thing, really strong, 7'6", another guy in that range. High shot rates, 25.3%, making 51% of his threes on 65 attempts, 32.9% assist rate, just really solid. Has been around a while, dealt with his own myriad of injuries. Now he's a senior, making things happen. Have to consider him as well. Maybe he's more on the alt lineup side for me at that 7'6" price, and Key George is more on the main team side. But if, again, Cryer ends up out, that's just going to be an elevation of Flagler as well, and he's going to definitely fly up the priority list for me. And I'm potentially looking at some lineups where I'm playing multiple Baylor guys. There is value to be had here, depending on how that news goes. Dale Bonner, who's already been playing accelerated minutes, 30-plus in 3 of his last 4. He has scored 20-plus fantasy points in those 3 of the 4. So you have him as an option at 4.7. Don't love the matchup for him. I think it's a little bit tougher than what he's been seeing, but he's definitely in play if he's going to play 30-plus minutes at sub 5K. And then Langston Love, who has played 20-plus minutes in 3 of his last 4, sitting there at 4-2, which includes a couple of games where he put up 27-plus fantasy points against Tarleton State and Nickel State. So not against necessarily super strong opponents, although Tarleton is pretty decent. But just another guy who would certainly benefit from Cryer ending up sitting out. Langston Love, played just the 1 game last year. High pedigree recruit, definitely has upside. Had a spot start in that game against Tarleton State where he played 35 minutes, and that was his best game of the season. So might we see him jump into the starting lineup here if Cryer's out and over Dale Bonner? Maybe. So we'll keep an eye on that news for Baylor. There's a lot in play here for their guys. And then you even have like Caleb Lohner and Jalen Bridges. They're both pretty solid prices as well in that 5K range, although they'll be dealing with a stout front court of Iowa State, a front court that has struggled offensively, but still has their shit together on the defensive end. Now, Iowa State is dealing with some issues of their own. Aljaz Kunk has a busted finger, I believe is what the official analysis was, that he suffered in practice. So they'll be without him. And he is a big time rotational player for them, 25 to 30 minutes pretty consistently for Kunk, to the point where, they're going to have to route those minutes. That's a big loss for them, even though he's not necessarily a big time scorer. He is a starter that's playing significant minutes. So that is a big time, loss for Iowa State in that regard. They're also, Osun Ashuni has not been the St. Bonaventure version of himself. None of those, St. Bonaventure, man, they crushed it for us in DFS for the last couple of years because they ran that starting lineup into the ground. But we're seeing them, life after St. Bonaventure, not so great. Kyle Lofton's kind of struggling for Florida. We're not seeing Oshuni, deal with his stuff very well. He's now dealing with a bum ankle. It sounds like he's going to play through it, but you look at what he's been doing the last couple of games. Prior to that, 10 minutes, 8 minutes, 17, 6, 11. Like, what the hell is going on with Osun? Because he was phenomenal last year, and we could use him with confidence, and he was scoring 30+. And to start this season, he was hanging those kind of numbers as well. So the 5.9 price for him, if he was healthy and I knew he was going to get regular minutes, I think he becomes almost a main team play at that point, but it's going to be tough to really trust using him at this moment in time. So with all of these, guys out and possibly out, that means probably a lot of shots for Jaron Holmes, who is priced at 7-1. So it's not as if we're getting a discount, but I would expect him to probably, chuck up like 15-ish type shots here against Baylor and really look to another St. Bonaventure guy, by the way, kind of keep them in the game and put the team on his back. So I do like him actually as a potential main team play for that reason alone. Looking at it, we have some cheap guys. Timin Lipsy has seen his minutes spike up recently at 5.7. He's playing quite well. I think that's an okay price point for him, depending on how this news shakes out, if they have to go with a smaller lineup. But guys who are going to benefit the most from these injuries, starting out, Robert Jones, we should see his minutes go up. He's actually played 20+ in 3 of his last 4. Expect him to, especially if Osun can't go, sounds like he will, but what is going to play like 5 minutes. If he absorbs a lot of Kunk's minutes and pushes his way up to 25 to 27, he actually becomes a pretty strong play at 4.9 against that Baylor front court. Hassan Ward, perhaps, VCU transfer. His minutes have been pretty sporadic throughout the season. If he can somehow reach up towards 20, he's only at 3.5. That makes him at least, worth a look, potentially. But I think it becomes Robert Jones as the main benefactor, and then guys like Jaron Holmes and Timin Lipsy as guys who are just going to shoot the ball a lot. But I love Key George in this one. I'm all in on Key George most likely, and then depending on how that news shakes out with Cryer, I'll decide on Langston Love, Dale Bonner, Adam Flagler, the rest of that unit. All right, last game on the slate. We did it. Didn't beat the 2 hours. Sorry, you live watchers, but I appreciate you guys anyways. Texas versus Oklahoma. Texas dealing with the drama that they are. Marcus Carr, though, man, can we finally say Marcus Carr is back? You know the Texas way, we're back. Carr, who went through some, regression, I guess is the term I can come up with. That's not really fitting him, but last year at Texas, he really didn't look like himself. And at Minnesota, we know how awesome he was. At Pittsburgh, his freshman year, we know how really good he was. It's high usage guy, making plays, high assist rate, high usage rate, high shot rate. Just looked more like a role player, and things just didn't quite work out. Now this year, I don't know if he just made the decision in the offseason that, Courtney Ramey's gone. I'm stepping in here. I'm gonna take a higher, amount of shots. I'm going to play the way I know I can, and I won't be denied. And they've turned him loose. And you see his rates now have returned more in line with his career numbers. 27% shot rate, 25% usage rate. Both of those numbers were in the low 22s last year. Assist rate sitting around 24%. Steal rate at 3.5%. That's a career high. He's drawing 5 fouls per 40. That's returning back to like his career averages. And he's shooting 45% from long range, which is also a career high after being a low 30s shooter throughout his collegiate career. So Carr is really, he's got my attention. We have to pay up for him at 7-7, but goodness gracious, the last game there, 41 real points on his way to just about 60. Before that, he had 3 straight that he rattled off over, 26 fantasy points. He's pretty much put up 23 plus in every single game this season. Really strong option here. Close game against Oklahoma. Now we have to realize Porter Moser is a defensive mastermind. I had to, remind myself last time when Oklahoma played Florida, and they held them to 53 points on that slate. Lofton just totally tanked me. It was a values and totally tanked me. I had my Alex Fudge shares because I'm a big Alex Fudge guys. He got shut down. Colin Castleton was the only one that they allowed to just completely just go nuts, and everybody else was contained. So I have to remind myself that sometimes with Porter Moser and the Sooners that they have the ability to really contain, shut down, or make life difficult for other teams, scorers. So I could see Carr struggle in that regard. So I don't necessarily feel like I'm going to be all in, but I'm definitely not going to get caught with my pants down and not have exposure to Marcus Carr. That's 100%, not happening again. Then you have the Timmy Allen at 7-6, a GPP look. Christian Bishop was super high owned last slate. Didn't necessarily surprise me, but I wasn't expecting over like 20%, and he was way over. And he played well, another 20 fantasy points. His minutes have been creeping up. He's playing about 20. The price is also creeping up. He's just not the Creighton version of himself. He has shown the ability to reach back and pull a game or two out of that era of his career. And it really, if Dylan Disu remains out, then I think that continues to at least solidify Bishop's playing time in that 20-minute range, which, until he gets to probably 6K, 6.5, something like that, he'll remain a viable option. I like Dylan Mitchell. He's 5'8", GPP for sure. Nobody's going to roster him. He's not a main team play because he does have a low floor, but he has shown a propensity to drop, 30-plus fantasy point games in the right scenario. And then, like I said, Timmy Allen and Tyrese Hunter just kind of second-tier plays. Tyrese Hunter is probably not playable at all right now. He started the season off so well, but he's kind of struggling right now. So 6-7 for him doesn't seem like a very wise decision. And Timmy Allen, he is capable of putting up 35, 40. We know that, but he's priced probably right about where he's going to score as a 3.5 to 4x type of guy. So we just maybe want to look up to Carr for 100 more, or go down and continue to play Bishop if he's going to continue to be popular. So we'll see how that shakes out. On the Oklahoma side, there is a massive Still big pricing error. This is the top value on the slate. It's a 12-game slate. I'm taking predictions on what we think his ownership will be. It's going to be massive, and it's disgusting for a 12-game slate. But of course, I'm talking about Milos Zuzan. It was in his 4-4. They didn't change his price much after last game against Florida. He was 60-70% owned in a lot of stuff. Played 33 minutes, put up 25. He was 4-1. They graciously did raise his price to 4-4. He should be over 5K because you go back and look, he scored over 20 fantasy points in 3 of 4, and he's played over 20 minutes in each of those games as well. Porter Moser clearly starting to trust him in a way that he's going to be on the floor a lot. He's contributing in multiple categories: steals, assists, rebounds. He's also starting to score. Milos is just such a lock and load at this 4-4 price. Now, Texas, defensively, they've got, their ability and can contain players as well. But Milos isn't going to be their priority contain. They're going to have to look at Grant Shearfield. They're going to have to look at Tanner Groves. They're going to be looking to stop those guys. If Joe Bamsil is playing, he's always a threat, even though he hasn't really shown it necessarily this season, which I'm disappointed about because I loved his prior years and how good he was. But he could explode at any time. At least I hope, and I am confident in him to do so. So there's just other guys they have to pay attention to. So Milos is going to be running around there, unchecked for the most part, which is going to allow him to, again, pay off this 4-4 price. He actually becomes probably the best per dollar play on the slate compared to everybody else. It's just, again, I want to stray from saying the value lock on paper or whatever, because he's 4-4 and he's perfectly capable of throwing up a single digit performance. It definitely happens all the time with these values, but if you've watched Oklahoma game or if you've seen any of him in action, he just looks like a guy that's out there. He's going to get shit done. And he's not one of those values that's kind of lost in translation. He's out there, running plays, hitting his spots, making things happen. So continue to roll Milos out there at 4-4 as your hammer play value extraordinaire. That's going to be popular. 12-game slates, disgusting to think of how high owned he's going to be, but that's where we're at with it. Groves, Jacob, and Tanner, I think both are definitely interesting plays. Tanner Groves at 6-7. It might be a little bit higher than I want to pay. He has looked solid in his last couple of games. Definitely on the rebounding side of things, that's where he's going to, get a lot of his damage and a lot of his fantasy points from. He does have a 33% combined rebounding rate, but the offensive side is almost non-existent. It's the defensive glass that he owns, where he has the 12th best rate in the country at 29.2%. So Groves owning the glass there, has a 5% block rate, shooting roughly 30% from long range. So as a big man capable of owning the glass, he can also bring his man out and at least make them respect him to a degree, or he's going to fire threes. You do have his brother Jacob Groves there. At 5'3", at least is somewhat playable because of the minutes. He's going to play 25 plus. He did see 30 plus in that game against Florida. Looking at it against Texas, this is going to be a close game, a conference battle. So you're going to see a lot less from the bench parts, or at least the deep bench or the back end guys. And you're going to see starters run a lot more. And that means Jacob Groves at 5'3" is going to wind up playing a lot more minutes than maybe people are accustomed to seeing, which could put him in that mid-30s range again, like he was last game against Florida. Now, he had 5 points and 6 rebounds, not a great, fantasy number necessarily, but we're looking at playing time here, and he has taken 10-plus shots in each of his last 2 games and put up almost 40 against Central Arkansas, so has shown his flashes. And then Jalen Hill rounds out that group. He also played mid-30s minutes, just another starter that's going to play a lot. 26 fantasy points, only 5K. Certainly worth a look there in your player pool. And then, of course, Grant Shearfield at 7.5. He has been around the block, high usage guy, high shot rate. capable of putting up 40. Hasn't really done that for this Oklahoma team just yet. Has a couple of 35s, especially recently, but a very safe floor, taking lots of shots. Hasn't had the peripherals that you'd like to see necessarily, but has been scoring at a very high clip, 20 plus real points in 4 of his last 5 games. 7.5 is a fair price for him. All right, so that is the slate breakdown. I do not see PrizePicks up on the board. Oh, I take it back. There is PrizePicks. Okay, so it wasn't there a second ago. Let me throw up the, it's weird. Let me throw up a core, and then we'll talk about PrizePicks, and then we'll do props tomorrow because we're already running really late. Appreciate those of you who are watching me live. There's quite a bit of you. I love it. Very thankful that you guys are hanging out with me here on Friday night. All right, so this 3-man core for me is going to have some, heavily owned guys, and then as usual, and then one that's kind of off the wall, the Walter special, whatever. So starts with Milos Uzan, 4-4. You just got to play Milos. It doesn't make any sense to fade him at that price. I get asked a lot, like, hey, since this guy's going to be so highly owned, does it make sense for me to fade? And if you're running multiple lineups, then sure, you definitely don't go 100%. But this is people asking me about their main lineups or their top 2 to 3 builds, and it makes sense to fade a high chalk player at 7, 8, 9, 10K range. It doesn't make sense to me personally when they're 4-4. So I'm rolling him with relative confidence. The second member of my core, I'm looking to this Baylor situation. Even if Cryer does play, I just find it hard to get away from Key George at 6'9". Again, matchup against Iowa State's not necessarily great, but he's going to play a lot, contribute in multiple categories, and isn't afraid to take over the scoring load when necessary. If things get stagnant on offense, he will create his own shot and make things happen. So Key George is core member number 2. And then the third member of the core, I think I'm going to go with another value, Virginia Tech, Darius Maddox at 4-1. With Maddox and Milos, that's just going to give us that, salary that we need to go ahead and spike. If it's Oscar Tshiebwe, one of the Arizona guys. If you want to go back to Soriano, who's been so good to us, except for last game, Bacho, there's a lot of different options here that we can look at, but that's just going to allow us to make that decision. And then we also have, several of these low 3K guys that we can speculate on and make a really big studs and scrubs lineup. Posh play of the day, kind of the 4A, I guess, or 3B. We'll call them 3B, the 3A and 3B core for Villanova. I talked him up so much. I would be up all night if I didn't stick with this. But Cam Whitmore sitting there at 6'6" against Marquette. Let's go ahead and tag him as the Posh play of the day. He is Posh play of the day, number 4 on the season. Fortunately, the Posh play of the day record is 1-2. Not the start that we wanted when we rolled that out, but I'm confident that we will pick that up. Last year, we were well over 70% on our Posh plays, and that's just basically the qualification for that is a relatively lower owned player that hits a minimum of 4x, especially good when they hit 5x plus. So their last one hit 3.6x, so can't count that one. But love Whitmore in this spot. This is a great, if ever there's a time for them to turn him loose for 30 minutes, it's here right now. Let the kid, go, take the training wheels off, and just let him play. I think it's time for that to happen. So hopefully they do so. And then as far as like your build with a third value, Longino at 3-3, like you can do some really sicko like things with Milos, Maddox, and Longino. And then if you play Key George and Whitmore, just say, for example, you have just the salary to play 3 knockout studs and really have a pretty nice lineup. If you're uncomfortable with that and you want to play just one of Cam Whitmore, Key George, you can still make a pretty sick lineup. So that is it for the slate. Let's go into PrizePicks. I will give you 2 since we're running so late here. I got to go back to Jordan Hawkins He was 20, I think it was 22 and a half last slate. He, of course, shattered that for us. 24.4 fantasy points. I love Jordan Hawkins. I think he's a star in the making. Anytime he's going to have under like 27 fantasy points, even in bad matchups, which this isn't, this is just a fine matchup, I'm going to slam the over. So over 24.4 fantasy points for Jordan Hawkins. That's play number one. That just seems like an elite spot for him to hit the over. The board is not fully developed yet. They just have like 3 or 4 games here. Let's see the PRA for our man Justin Mutz. 23.5. It's just okay. Rebounds. I will take as play number 2 here, and this is subject to change once the full board is out in the morning. Justin Mutz over 7.5 rebounds against Wake Forest. I like his chances of having 9 to 10 rebounds against Wake Forest here. So give me the over 7.5 and over Jordan Hawkins 24.4 fantasy points. But all day we have basketball games. Expect PrizePicks to have a ton more options. Expect the prop market on DraftKings, FanDuel, and Caesars and all those guys to have props up as well. That'll be in the tracker and the Discord. Thanks to everyone who continued to watch live, or if you're watching this on demand, there will be an article kind of rehashing some of this stuff and some further thoughts on additional plays and kind of narrowing down that player pool bright and early, a couple hours before the slate locks. Same thing with college football. We have the playoffs going on tomorrow, so that is going to have an article out bright and early as well. And then I'll be in the Discord throughout the day answering questions, tilting with you guys, and just generally grinding out some profitability here on this Saturday. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. I'm going to go get some rest, and then I will be back tomorrow morning in the Discord grinding away. Good luck.